All right, we are live. All right, hello everybody. This is Joseph MoJOE McCarthy with the effervescent Kristina Holle. Kristina, how are you today?
I'm very good. And how are you?
If I was any better, I would get arrested. I told you that
Oh,
earlier, but that's my favorite line. So here we are on Leadership 2.0, and this is episode number 5. Kristina and I are about to launch into a discussion on the 5 agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. In the last few episodes, we've covered numbers 1, 2, and 3 at length, and so if you've missed those, we invite you to go back to the replay. It's well worth your time. It's really life transforming dialogue there, based on an amazing book, 2 books actually. So many of you who are listening may be familiar with Don Miguel Ruiz's first book, The 4 Agreements. That one's quite popular and well worth your reading. I don't care who you are, age, stage, whatever you're doing or not doing. The 4 Agreements can be life transforming if you implement it, of course. And then that was in 1997, I believe. And then in 2010, he wrote a second book called The 5th Agreement. And so we've put all those together, and we're covering in this format the 5 agreements. But before we get into all that, Kristina, for those who haven't met you before, would you just introduce yourself, do your little elevator pitch, and let people know how do they connect with you off of this space?
sure. My name is Kristina Holle. I am a business consultant as well as an executive coach. I help leaders and organizations thrive so they can have a very successful culture. Where you can get a hold of me if you're interested in something like that, definitely I have my website posted below. But just so you know, I have over 25 years HR leadership experience in many different organizations. And, I love this challenge of working with different organizations to get them right on track. So I'll leave it
And
at that.
now you have quite a bit of experience in HR. I know that is true.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're on your own. You're out there as the
Yeah, I'm
consultant, right?
supporting other clients. Yeah, there's and it's been quite fun. I do like executive coaching, so I've done some one-on-one stuff with them, and then there's other organizations where I've done culture audits and I go in deeper and really help them with some of their strategy and being able to move forward. And yeah, that's what I do. And then I'm also an author, so
Yes.
that's
What's
what
your book?
changed my life and
Tell
kind of
people
got
about
me
your
to
book.
step out. Yeah.
Tell people about your book, Kristina.
Yeah, my book is called The Authentic You Unleash Your Leadership Potential. Really, it was interesting being in HR. I would always have people come up to me and say, "Hey, make me a leader." But I'm a true believer that when you start leaning into who you are, you're actually very exceptional. And you don't need to follow a script. You need
Mm.
to be your authentic self. And I think that that's what the book does. It helps people align with who they're meant to be, kind of how do I get to that point? And yeah, so that's the deeper level leadership development stuff that I'm working on.
Tell us the title again, a little bit slower this time for those who didn't catch the first
Oh,
one.
of course. The Authentic You Unleash Your Leadership Potential. You
Right
can
on. Do
find
you
it
have
on Amazon or any, just look it up online. It's there. You'll find it.
when did that come out? When did you publish that?
That was published 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And now there's like additional programs that are coming out based on the book, which is it's actually kind of blowing my mind. It's
Yeah.
that yeah, because
Love it.
it changed my life. So I wrote this book not just to be another what you need to do on the outside. It actually I'm living proof it changed my life, and now it's kind of operating on this whole coaching piece on a much deeper level. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I've heard it said that the most transforming book isn't one you read, it's the one you write. And that sounds like that's the
Literally.
case, right? Yeah.
Literally that
Yeah.
happened. Yeah.
Awesome.
It's so
And
true.
not coincidentally, Kristina, I don't know if I sent this to you this morning or not, but I send out little inspirational, motivational
I
posts
love
to my
them.
friends,
Yeah.
right? So this morning, here's what I wrote, and this ties directly into what you just said. Dear friend, push yourself past your perceived limits,
Mm-hmm.
exceed your own expectations,
Mm-hmm.
make yourself proud. You have far more potential than you can possibly imagine.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed. I
yeah.
love that.
So
Timing's perfect.
absolutely,
Yeah.
we're definitely on the same page. It's
100%.
for those who haven't tuned into a previous episode. We have 2 other members of the Leadership 2.0 team, which cannot join us today. They all have very busy lives and consulting practices as well. And that is Angelina Frost, who's down in Argentina, and Jon Weirauch, who is in Michigan. Kristina, I don't think you shared where you're hailing from today. Where are you?
Oh, I'm based in Canada, very close to Toronto. Yeah.
So Kristina's in Toronto. I'm in Southern California. So we have at least 2 continents covered with the 4 of us, and between the 2 of us, we have 2 countries covered. So we're spreading our wings as far as possible. Yeah. So Kristina and I have shared several talks on the Wisdom platform, social audio. That's where we met. And then we've done many episodes of leadership. This is our second round in the leadership program. We had another one called Leadership Happens on Fireside. But Fireside pretty much fired everybody. And so here we are on StreamYard now. That's a whole other story. Okay, so Kristina, have you read the 4 agreements and or the 5th agreement?
I have.
Yeah, you have.
I have.
Yeah, very good. And would you recommend that to pretty much anybody and everybody to read those books?
Yes, I would. And one thing I would say, it's quite interesting because on top line, someone may not think this is a leadership book, but this is the whole point of some of these extra self-help, deeper dive kind of books. It's really about alignment and how you show up. So, the 4 agreements, you'd be, oh yeah, that's a nice to do. It's only in this part of my life. But we're here to demonstrate that it's actually in all parts, including your work environment and how you actually show up. They're great guidance.
Yeah. So I've heard it said, and I fully agree, that leadership always begins with you. And if you're not leading yourself well, it's pretty tough to lead anybody else well as well. And so these 4 agreements, the 5 agreements actually are all about how to lead yourself well. And once you got that started, which is the beginning of emotional intelligence, by the way, self-awareness, self-management, and then social awareness and relationship management. Those are the 4 tenets of emotional intelligence. So this is starting ground zero, right? Self-awareness and self-management. The first 3 agreements, which we've covered already, and so I won't get into these in detail, were 1, be impeccable with your word. And I just like saying the word impeccable because I don't get to say that nearly enough.
Great word. Great word. Yeah.
2, don't take anything personally. I try not to take even that personally, right? And then number 3, don't make assumptions. And we all know that assume is built into the word. It makes an ass out of you and me. So you got to be careful around that one. Now we're going to dive into number 4. And this is always do your best, which sounds like something Mom would say. And actually Mom did say several times. And the sub heading under always do your best is your best is going to change from moment to moment. It will be different when you're healthy as opposed to when you're sick. But under any circumstance, simply do your best and you will avoid self-judgment, self-abuse, and regret.
I love that.
What's that bring up for you, Kristina?
Yeah, I would say, like, again, it's linking you back into your emotional intelligence, your heart space, right? Give it your all. Like, put your heart into things. When we do things that are kind of half-assed, that actually demonstrates. We actually know, right? We don't need other people to tell us. Like, if I have heard, and I have in certain environments, like, oh, that's not my job. I don't do that. Like, no, right? But it's actually an act that could help someone else, or that would just kind of put the ball over the goal line. If you're stopping before, it's kind of like you're not doing your best. You're kind of like selling yourself short because you got caught up in the script as to who you're supposed to be or how you're supposed to show up or whatever. When we give our heart into things, we go the extra mile. We actually want to help some support or connect with other people. And I think I love that because, I'll get real for a minute, but like when someone loses someone, let's say someone passes away and they really come to realize, like, everybody goes through this in some point in their life. I have, and I know everyone, you will lose someone. You value what life really looks like. So you're not going to shortchange yourself. You're actually going to do things wholeheartedly because you just never know when your ticket is up. So you really want to make sure that, I know my philosophy anyways, is that I can go to sleep at night. I know I gave it my all, and I'm not feeling as though I'm upset or that I'm caught up in a web of lies or all that stuff. Like, that's just not good way to operate in your life. That's what I would say. So I'll just pause there.
That's good. So just yesterday, I got to hear Brendan Burchard live at his Growth Day LA event, which was phenomenal. It's a small theater called the Alex Theater, which we found out yesterday was where Walt Disney would screen all of his animated
Oh,
films
wow.
before they went public. So he'd
Mhm.
bring his staff into this Alex Theater in Glendale. And so that was just like sitting in history, right? And Brendan Burchard, who's, for those who don't know, Brendan Burchard is the coach or mentor to the most high performance people in the world, including Oprah Winfrey, Tony Robbins, and the list goes on. And he's very humble about it. But he brings on the stage not only himself, but Ed Milet. If you haven't met Ed, he's considered right now, was just named the #1 mindset coach in the world.
Mm.
And then Trent Shelton, former NFL star, who's now talking about personal development and personal mindset, and Lori Harder, just amazing lineup, right? And I'm sitting here in a crowd of people who want nothing but to grow, right? They're all in there to learn and to grow. And Brendan at one point, and he's hilarious and he's super personable and full of wisdom, and he says to the crowd, "Are you half-assing it?" Right? Which is the word you just used.
There you go.
Right? Yeah, he just stopped right in the middle of his talk. He says,
Yeah.
so, and I can't remember exactly what he was asking us to do, to turn to somebody and say something or get involved. And he says, so just ask yourself right now, are you half-assing it?
Mhm.
And then he was one of the first ones to say it. So each of the speakers then picked up on it later in their own talk and built that in. And I just thought that was hilarious, right? Because of the timing, but here we are talking about always doing your best, which is, if you're always doing your best, you're not half-assing it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but we live in a culture now that kind of has this pervasive theme that good enough is good enough. You just do the bare minimum to get by. And you see this kind of in the quiet quitting movement, or there's just an element where it's kind of more pervasive than I remember when I was a kid. And I grew up in a household where my parents said, if anything is worth doing, it's worth doing right. If
Right.
anything's worth doing, it's worth doing well. So whatever you're doing, just doesn't mean you're going to do it perfectly, but do the best you can. So that was kind of built into our culture as a family. But I do see what they're talking about now, that in this culture, especially after COVID, people kind of got disengaged from their work anyway, physically. And now that they're coming back to work and not everybody is actually back in, there's a heightened sense of people are just doing the bare minimum to get by and no more. And this is contrary to Don Miguel Ruiz's proposal agreement that we always do our best. So let's talk a little bit, Kristina, about what's happening in the workplace culture and a little bit why. And then how do we tip that scale back towards what I think was much more pervasive,
Right.
especially in my father's generation and my grandfather's generation, where it didn't matter who you're working for or how hard you're working, your MO, right? Your modus operandi was,
Yeah.
I will do my best at all times.
Yeah, my thoughts are, we have different generations in the workplace right now. We probably have 5 generations in the workplace. And, some of the more tenured folks, even like Gen X is my generation, I'm a Gen X, we're much more focused around that work ethic, deeper level. And, I would say it was more of an employer's market, right? So they basically, employees would, like, they were locked in, they were much more loyal, and they were going to stay for a longer term of time. Like, that's not a problem. Now with the younger folks, and I don't necessarily think that they're wrong, I think that they just have a different expectation as to what an employer is supposed to provide in order for them to feel connected. For many of them, it doesn't even have to do with money. It's really about a sense of belonging and being connected and seeing the values
I hear the
of
word
the
purpose a lot.
organization, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think the work that I've done with some teams, you really see the old school of management and then this new age management. I'll just use it in 2 little buckets to simplify.
Sure.
I think you need a bit of both. I think that what I believe is happening is that leaders, that's why we're having these conversations. And that's why, I didn't just want to help one organization. I want to help many, just like all of us,
Right.
to understand that how you show up as a leader matters, right? The saying, like, people leave bad bosses, they don't leave jobs, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you're a poor leader and you're not invested in your people the way that we would like you to see you invested, that is going to work against you. So that when you are the employee, you're not likely to go the extra mile or kind of really want to work with this individual. It just becomes a quotation job per
Mhm.
se, and there's nothing inspirational, motivational about it. So
Right.
the work, the work that I've done, and I know we mentioned the book before, but that's what kind of sparked it, because I was like, we need authentic leaders, ones that know how to motivate and inspire. But some of them don't even know how to do that for themselves. So how are they
Right.
supposed to do it for teams?
Yeah.
So I'll pause there.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about the generation gap here, because my observation and my experience is that the generation ahead of me, and I'm right on the bubble of Gen X as well, um, they've gone through an era where they knew that they were going to work really hard. That it was
Mhm.
the expectation was to work really hard, and so especially in let's take doctors for instance. Doctors know that when they start, they're going to get paid hardly anything, and they're going to work around the clock. And there's this ethic kind of built into the system where you're gonna work yourself to the bone to
Mhm.
exhaustion, right? But that's just expected. That's kind of what you have to go through in order to move yourself up through that particular field. And you see this in other fields as well.
Mhm.
Um, and my dad, who was a farmer and a mechanic, and he was just a laborer, worked his tail off. He was the hardest worker I've ever known. If he was awake, he was working basically.
Yeah.
And and so what I'm observing, I'd love to get your take on this, is I think there's a generation that is kind of at the C level and the highest levels of organizations that worked really hard to get where they are, and they don't understand why this next generation doesn't have that same work ethic built in, because that's
Mhm.
just part of their DNA. That's part of their system. They
Mhm.
don't know another way. And the initial thing is it's like a negative judgment. What's wrong with you that you won't work hard? But I think that's the wrong question, right?
Yeah, I think so
So I
too.
don't think there's anything wrong with the next generation. I just think they're raised in a different culture and don't necessarily understand, one, where their boss is coming from, or
Mhm.
two, more to the point, what's the purpose? What's the return on investment if I work above and beyond what's expected of me? Because I don't understand. My assumption or my preposition here is that the younger generation doesn't see the value in working as hard as their parents or grandparents did, because there's not a reward for that. And
Mhm.
I might be off here, but that's a good place for discussion.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's definitely different perspectives on it. I would say even something simple, and like I'll use this as an example of what I've witnessed. It's really about learning how to work smarter, not harder. So before COVID, if someone was working from home or something was going on, people would be like, oh, are they really working? Very skeptical, all this
Right?
stuff, right?
Yeah.
They rather have FaceTime. I would say like FaceTime is ridiculous. FaceTime is like zero productivity, but I'm sitting there. So you see me, so you assume that I'm working. That's not
Right.
smart practices.
Butt in the
So
seat. It's the butt in the seat
I'm in
mentality.
the seat, I'm
Right.
gossiping, I'm like really bored, and I really don't want to be there, but I'm working. You
I'm in
see
my
me, and
office.
remember some of those old beliefs, and maybe some places it's still like that. I don't know, but like you would never want to leave before your boss left, because
Right.
that would and there was like these undue pressures that were along with it. But what I will say is that they're not realistic. As long as people are highly effective and you are trusting them to manage their time as such, I think that would be amazing, right? Like that should be great, because you have them bought in. They're not falling into these old routines, which is, think about that. I'm going to get you to sit in that chair the whole time because that's about control.
Yeah.
I'm your boss, so I'm going to control you, and I'm not going to trust that you can potentially leave. That is an incorrect assumption.
Right.
And the person that might figure out how to work their work differently in order to be highly successful, that we should be celebrating that. And I think that that's kind of the younger generations. I think they're much more clever on technology and how to navigate and do all that stuff. They have other things where I think putting time in and understanding the patience of learning something, that's not as fast. That's a whole other discussion. So
Right. That's good. It's good. So I've had both kinds of bosses. Ones who were far more concerned about how many hours I put in the chair in my office than they were about my actual production, right?
mhm.
And there are certain things that I get this is true of everybody. Certain things after I've done for a while, I get very proficient. And so what
Yeah,
once took me 4 hours, now I can do in 40 minutes because
yeah,
I know how it works now, right? And
yeah,
I'm very good
yeah.
at that.
Makes sense.
So my the thoughts and the story in my head was, why do I have to spend 4 hours in my chair when I got the job done and I did it really well? It's not like I'm cutting out
Hmm.
early.
Hmm.
But so there's a disconnect here between the expectation that I'm paying you to sit in your office, which I'm like, well, how's that benefiting anybody, right? I'm sitting in my office for 8 hours and actually kind of resenting it because in 4 hours I got my work done and I did it really well, but I don't have the freedom now to either do my own thing or to leave the office for fear of judgment. And
Hmm.
that there's a disconnect there. And I think this is exaggerated or accelerated by this next new generation who they are very ambitious and they will find a way to get the work done as quickly and as well as possible. But then, then there's that same disconnect. Well, why am I here if I've done all the work that was expected of me, and there's no particular reward, both for me or for the organization, for me to sit my butt in the chair for another 4 hours, right?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a learning from each generation that should be incorporated as we move forward. No one has it the right way. There's no
Yeah,
right way. It's
right.
actually evolving. And if we evolve properly, we should really be listening to the different perspectives as to how we're working. Like, there's all these different thoughts on having 4-day work weeks, or like, how do we limitless vacation and all that stuff. What that is like allowing people to manage their time as such and make sure that they get the work done. And if they don't get the work done, then you have conversations. But there's a different level of trust that I
Right.
think exists when you
Trust.
are putting that stuff out there. And considering where we're at with mental well-being, you know, people like really needing to feel connected and a sense of belonging, I think that the more you can trust your employees, the better the setup will be
Yeah.
in the end of it.
Right. So my mom and I used to have this classic clash when I was in high school. And it was basically circular argument always went like this. My mom would say, Joe, I'm not going to give you any more freedom until you prove you're responsible. And I would say to my mom, how can I prove I'm responsible when I don't have any freedom to prove it? Right. And we go
That's
round
actually
and
true.
around. I'm like,
Yeah.
you've got to give me a longer leash to prove that I won't run off.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, you got to prove that you're responsible before I give you a longer leash. And so that impasse, which it's funny because it's my own high school experience, but that is kind of the same dynamic we're talking
Yeah.
about in trust, right?
Yeah.
Where the boss, I think most bosses want to trust their employees to do a great job and
Yeah.
go above and beyond, but there is this sense of fear, perhaps,
Mhm.
or distrust at the very least,
Mhm.
that if I give the freedom to the employee, then they're not going to be responsible. And I think the employees are saying, how can I prove I'm responsible unless you give me freedom?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And it's like, here's the reality. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would say 95% of the people out there don't go to work and say, hey, I'm going to be horrible today. I am just going to not do a good job, and I'm not going to do this. I'm going to just make everyone's life horrible. Yeah, there is characters in the mix that
Of
could
course.
happen, but
Right.
overall, I think people really just want to be appreciated. They want to show up. They want to feel like their contribution made a difference. So it
Yeah.
goes back to one of the agreements. Like, they want to go and feel as though they've done their best. They did a good job.
Right.
But if the environment isn't set up properly and you're kind of giving bare bones to them, then you're probably going to get that in receiving that back from them.
So let's go to reward systems for a little bit here.
Okay.
So what I was taught was that virtue is its own reward. That
Yeah.
Joe, if you do the right thing, you're going to feel so good about yourself for having made that decision, whether or not anybody sees you or rewards you, that virtue is its own reward. And I would say I have experienced that to some degree, but there's still a big part of me that wants to be seen and attaboy and get the award or the accolade or the raise or whatever that is. But I think for many of my working years, I thought naively that if I did my best always, that somehow it would always be recognized and rewarded. And then I kind of got jaded over the years because I would see people who, from my perception, weren't doing their best. They didn't seem to care about their job, and they got promoted, and they got the awards and the attaboys and the accolades, and I got overlooked. And so I like, where's the disconnect here, right? I'm doing what I think is the best to my abilities. I'm contributing more than my job description requires, and I kind of get, if it's noticed at all, it's certainly not rewarded. So I think there's two dynamics here, and I want to get your take on this. There's the intrinsic reward. Yes, I'm feeling very proud of my performance, my job, what I'm doing. But there is also a need in all of us to be seen. I can think of my little girls when they're little. They're like, "Can you see me, Dad? Over here. Did you see that? Did you see what I did? Did you see? I waved my hand. Did you see that, Dad?" I'm like, "Yeah, great job, honey." But there's something inside of us that want to matter. I think this is the core of it. Is that it's so important for us to matter, and not just I matter to me, but I matter to the people that I'm connected with. And if that system isn't working, that there isn't a recognition even that, hey, I see what you're doing, and I'm so proud of you at the very least, right?
Yeah.
That's because there's kind of a breakdown.
Yeah, I would say high level, it's a systemic issue. It's like, it's one of those things that, we're all kind of chipping away at it, but it's the way that the system is set up, right? It's like one winner. We have one person who gets the senior role. We have one person who gets the promotion. And if it's not set up properly, that we reward it in a way that other people are still seen, even if you have one winner, that can be pretty discouraging to some. Yeah. And I think that, if I were to suggest in like reworking some of that stuff, it's more about having this collaborative spirit and kind of really having people work together. And I used to always say to my team, like, are you seen, value, and heard? It's that simple. Those are the three. Like they should pop up for every single manager or leader in your organization. When you're speaking to your team, are they seen, value, and heard? That's it. And if they're not, then you've missed something. Because there's many times in my experience that by the time they would come to me, they'd be like, "Oh, so-and-so's really upset. They didn't feel as though they got this. They didn't blah, 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 whatever." And I'd be like, "Well, how did you communicate it? Or did you tell them that you appreciated them?" "No, I didn't think it was important," but it is important. That's the systemic change, right? It's making leaders accountable that they're your people. Like you are responsible for, and they're all going to be unique and different, but you're responsible for actually seeing them, right? And making them feel as though they're a part of something.
Yeah.
Right? The old system is very isolated. It's like only one winner. And then what it does, now you got me.
I love it.
So what it does,
go with it.
It breeds poor behavior.
Yeah.
It breeds ego. It breeds, I'm going to isolate. This is the cool group. These are the ones that are only exceeding and getting all the rewards. But
the insiders, yeah.
Right.
But
the fact is, if you have the power as a leader to inspire all of them in some way or form, if you take the time to see, value, and hear them.
Yeah.
And I think that is the message to start working on, because the egomaniac loves the corporate structure, because you have external visibility all the way through about how amazing you are. It's either through titles, through money. I used to hear stuff like, "Well, that's above my pay grade." And I'm like, "Oh, that's awful." So what, you stop thinking because it's above your pay grade? I'm like, that is not doing your best. Back to the agreement. That is you selling yourself short. So I think it's those kind of things, is understanding that if we can get to leaders and help them understand that you have power, like really amazing power, to make a difference with your team. And it doesn't have to be with rewards. It has to be like really spending quality time and kind of listening and hearing what they want to contribute. So
this is perfect because it's actually addressing our earlier question about the generation gap, because my dad and his generation didn't grow up in a culture where they were required that they were seen, valued, and heard.
No, it didn't matter.
It wasn't necessary. They were getting paid, and they're paid to play, right? And my dad says the fact that I got to work was a privilege, because there were a lot of people who didn't have jobs, right?
Right.
So they knew that they were already in a privileged position, just that they had a good job. But what's bridged by, I love this, what you're talking about, because we can bridge the gap between the senior level managers who didn't grow up in that system.
Right.
Now they've got a workforce who actually feels that being seen, valued, and heard is essential.
It is very important
to them showing up and feeling good about themselves and feeling committed to their job. And so this is a willingness, right? This is a willingness of one generation to say, I didn't need this, but I can either decide one of two things. I didn't need this, so nobody else does, which then now we got a breakdown. Or I didn't need this, but now there's a generation of people who do. So how do I provide what they need? Not because I'm somehow placating them, but because that's how I bring out the best in them. And I think that's a mind shift that has to happen in leadership to say, okay, I don't understand why they need it, because I never did, but that doesn't mean it's not important. And how can I give it to them in a way that it's not placating or just trying to pat them on the head, but it's actually a true value proposition where it affirms who they are.
Well, and I would say, this is to go a little bit deeper, maybe they did need it, but it was not recognized. Right. So that you kind of, and I lived that, right? So then you start numbing out, like, okay, well, this isn't even anything that or anybody recognizes. It's too feely. It's too emotional. There's no value for emotion. But the fact is, we're learning, right? We're evolving. And that's the beauty of it. It's like, we do need that, because when we tap into our emotional intelligence and go in a little bit deeper, that's where we find innovation, inspiration, creativity. That's where you get your competitive edge.
Right.
But that comes from your emotional piece. It doesn't come from here. It can, but it's not going to flow and be as creative and, I would say, magical, because you just don't know what's going to happen when you're over orchestrating it. It's when you're doing mind work, it's too linear. Like, you need to have a combination of both. And that's where the beauty is that the younger generation, I would say, like, people on my team and whatnot, they are teaching us that, hey, emotions are important. And you know how I know they're important? Because we have this epidemic around mental health right now. And we have stuff where people have not been able to cope. And in the past, we would just, I literally had heard this many times in my career, like, oh, we just leave our problems at the door. I don't want to hear it. You shut that out. But now it's almost like the visual I have is like a dam, and you're holding the water back, and it's just going to bust through. So you're either going to learn how to have a boat and how to navigate through it, or you're going to get flushed right through, because those emotions are in there. They're in your organization. Like, do you know how to manage them? And they're not a bad thing if you manage them effectively.
That's good. It's really good. In fact, you could say that the water behind the dam has been building up for generations, right? It's not just a one-time thing. It's not even just one person. There's a cultural dam going on here. And the water's been building up, right? Go ahead, keep going.
No, and I say that because, like, I was doing HR for 25 years. So, and I fell into it, like, oh yeah, well, that toughness in the corporate world and whatnot. Yes, I understand you need it. Thick skin, especially being a female, usually working with a bunch of guys and all that stuff. But I will say, it was always there because I was privy in HR. People would come to me all the time with hurt feelings and how to navigate and what should they do because their boss said this, or they didn't feel heard, or they were dismissed, or whatever. That's the dam, right? but we
Yeah.
masked it and pretend, well, it's not that bad, right?
Sure.
Or you would have someone like me who's really good with kind of helping people get back into the swing of things, back in line. But now it's kind of like, no, it's evolving. And the people that really need to learn how to shift is us, the ones that are senior leaders, to manage emotions. That's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that people get to like, let it rip or whatever. But if you teach them how to self-regulate, have
Yes.
self-awareness, how to manage and navigate their environments, then it's
so
a
good.
non-issue.
Yeah. Self-regulate. So this is key, what we're talking about right here. Self-regulate has to start with self. And many bosses weren't taught this, and it wasn't important in their generations. Culturally, we're talking about, right? So this is not pointing the fingers at the boss day. This is to say,
of course.
This is to say it's an evolution. But self-regulation starts with self-awareness, of course. And then self-regulation means that when the emotions inevitably come up, because we're human, by the way, right? That do we respond appropriately? Jon Weirauch, who's not here today, often talks about this metaphor of a lake. And the lake's still and it's calm, it's peaceful, there's nothing going on. And all of a sudden, a rock gets thrown in, and there's a splash and there's ripples. But based on the size of the rock, the waves are bigger or smaller according to the size of the rock, and then they dissipate, and eventually it goes back to the serene level. He says, we know we're not self-regulating very well when a little pebble gets thrown into our lake of peace, and we go, ah!
Yeah.
Right? We go crazy.
Yeah.
Or vice versa, which is the other generation ahead of us. A big old boulder comes down the hill and it lands in the lake, and they go, nothing happened. It's all good.
Yeah.
Right. But
Right.
neither one of those
They're
even
not good.
resemble nature, right? Neither one of those is the way we're built.
Yeah.
So Jon talks a lot about how an appropriate response to the appropriate circumstance. And that's what self-awareness and self-regulation can do. And once I start to see that in myself, and I could say, okay, a little trouble creates a little ripple, and then we work through it and it goes back to homeostasis. And a big trouble creates a big ripple, and we deal with it at that level, and then it goes back to homeostasis. But it's when the little rocks make the big ripples and vice versa, that we know that there's issues, there's work to be done, right?
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. This is one thing that I've learned over the years, and after kind of doing this work with the book and stuff like that, it's kind of, your triggers are gifts. Okay. I want people to understand this.
Say that nice and slow.
Your triggers are gifts. They tell you exactly where you need to do your deeper level work. Now, if you learn how to let it pass through, okay, instead of fighting it and resisting it, this is the problem. This is back to the dam analogy, where we're pushing it back up. Like, I'm not really upset that I got dismissed. It doesn't really matter. But the deeper level, even there, if you want to go even further, is that when we are pushing it back, you think it's about the moment where a boss was dismissing you. Like, for me, dismissing was a big one. Sure. You think it's about that. But if you learn the art of sitting with it and self-reflection, and it could even be like, hey, do your drive home, reflect, where is this coming from? And when that happens, you'll realize it's something to do with in the past, something that happened, like maybe your parents dismissed you, or a teacher, or something happened. And that's like the deeper level work. But I want you to understand, instead of getting all worked up, and I've seen senior level leaders totally derail themselves when they get triggered, right? How dare you say this? Then they start like saying things that they're going to regret, and it takes their credibility and kind of shifts them in the wrong direction. That's because they haven't learned how to manage through the emotions. Back to the dam. So if the water is going to flow, let it flow. And then it goes away. Then it's a smooth little ride. But if you're holding it back, you're building up the tsunami that's going to knock everyone over and really cause some damage. We don't need that.
Yeah.
We don't need that. So it can be a river, or it could be a tsunami. That is your choice.
Yeah. So it's no surprise to me at all that the exact same language I heard yesterday at Growth Day Live. Lori Harder comes on and she talks about how she was always deathly afraid of being on stage, and now she's a public speaker and a business owner and all this stuff. And so she used the illustration of the tsunami, of the emotion. So
Oh my God.
yeah, exact same words,
Yeah.
right? She says, right
This
as
is
I'm going
so
on
awesome.
stage, I could see to my mind this giant tidal wave, this tsunami
Yeah.
of emotion that's freaking me out, right? I
Yeah.
can't breathe, I can't stutter, I
Yeah.
can't remember what I'm going to say. And so she says, I come up with all these little hacks in order to get myself through this. But the point, the biggest point, which tied in directly what you said, is that she says, I know that feeling will only last about 90 seconds.
Yeah.
So I just have to
True.
find a way to get myself through the wave.
Yeah.
So she gave several hacks about how she gets the audience to talk to each other, or she gets them all distracted on themselves. Okay, find somebody you've never met and do this thing.
Yeah.
So that the 90 seconds where she's freaking out and her whole body's just paralyzed, it flows through. She lets it go, and then when the attention comes back on her, she's like, okay, I want to be here. I can do this. And then she's very, very
That's
articulate.
amazing.
And yeah. But all that to say, it's a real life illustration from yesterday that ties directly what you're saying.
So
That says
crazy.
that the emotions feel like a tsunami, and so we think we're going to die, right? Everything in our nervous system says run for your life, hide, put up the dam, whatever it is. Not understanding that even with a wave, if you take a cork and you put it on a wave, if the wave is tiny, the cork is on top. If a wave is huge, the cork is on top. Right? But if I try to be a rock, then bam, I just get crushed. So it's learning how to be buoyant, so that regardless of the size of the wave, you just ride it out, and this too shall pass. Right?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Like when so it's kind of funny that I'm a person that's talking about emotional intelligence and emotion, and emotion leads to intuition and all this. It just builds, right? Once you start playing around in this space, because 5 years ago, I was not speaking about any of this stuff around emotional intelligence. I did not even see the connection, but I was guilty of the dam of blocking all that stuff, right? Because if I showed I was too emotional, then I wouldn't fit into the systemic structure that was in place. But the fact is, it's opposite. The more you can play around with your emotions, all of them, the really pretty ones, the ones that we love, that everybody accepts, joy, happiness, everyone loves those ones. But anger, sadness, those darker ones, they're healthy. So the more you can allow that to ride through, it doesn't have to be in front of everybody, but for you to understand, it's your inner compass that's telling you something's wrong, right? So you're not going to mask that like we've done in the past. If you learn to embody it and say, oh, okay, this is where it's coming from, then you are empowered. You just empowered yourself instead of blocking it and only functioning as a part of you, right? So it's something to think about.
So here's how this plays out for me in my mind and also in the workplace, is that, I've been taught and been modeled for me that the more responsibility I have, the higher responsibility I have in my promotions, the more stoic I should be, the more in control of myself, the stronger. Don't let them see you sweat. You just gotta be strong. And this is from a generation whose heroes were John Wayne and Steve McQueen, and
absolutely
tough guys. All the tough guys, right? The tough guys were the heroes, even the Ronald Reagan era, right? And so there's something in me that says, okay, the more power I have, the more influence I have, the less emotional I'm supposed to be, which is, it's a false narrative, but that's what I've received. But here's what really helped break this open for me, and I use the word break intentionally here, is that one of my friends was at a conference with a bunch of guys, and they were learning how to be a better worker, a better boss, a better dad, a better husband, right? And this nationally renowned speakers up front and saying, you guys want to be the best dad ever? Yeah. You want to be the best worker? Yeah. You want to be the best boss? Yeah. All this testosterone is just pumping right through the roof. And the guy says, well, here's the deal. Humans connect most profoundly at their level of weakness. And the whole room goes, what?
Right? What are you doing?
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Are you lying to me? Right? Because that's not what we've been taught. And then he goes on to illustrate it. And the illustration for me that works and just fills my heart with goodness all the time is this art in Japan called kintsugi.
Oh, yeah.
It's
You told me
Kintsugi. And have you heard me talk about this before?
Yeah, I love this. Yeah.
But kintsugi is this Japanese art form where the artists, when a porcelain bowl or a valuable vase or a statue falls and breaks or gets knocked over, they don't sweep up the pieces and throw them in the trash, right? They have artists whose life has been spent learning how to put the pieces back together to recreate the vase. But this is so cool, is that they don't try to make it look as if it never broke. They don't try to seam it together and so that it looks perfect. They actually take gold or silver or platinum or some precious metal, and they use that to weld the pieces together, which is extremely visible. It contrasts with the colors of the porcelain bowl or whatever. And so when they rebuild it, it now has these veins of precious metal where all the broken pieces were put back together. Beautiful. And they say, now it's actually more precious because no two vases, no two bowls, when they crash, ever crack the same, right? They have their own unique splatter. And they put it together as precious metal to say, this doesn't look like any other bowl that's ever been. And it's beautiful. The veins are actually gorgeous. If you look up kintsugi online, you'll see examples of it. It's really pretty. And they say, this is actually more precious now than when it was perfect. Yeah. And because you can see where this illustration goes, I'll start crying here in a second, right? Yeah. But this is so good. And I was telling this illustration to my friend Pete and his wife Nicole. And Nicole says, and get this, and I never thought about it this way. She says, get this. When you're putting a vase back together, right, there's pieces missing. You're in process. Everything's not back together yet. But if the light's inside the vase, how does the light shine out? It shines out through the holes that are still missing. Yeah. And suddenly she just poured value into this whole illustration that not only are we all being rebuilt from the pain and the shame and the trauma that we've all experienced, but that those veins aren't supposed to disappear. Our scars don't disappear. I've got a scar right here on my wrist. It says something that I survived, something I went through, right? And now it's something to celebrate. And I can't help but think of the first Jaws movie, and before the big scene where they take on the shark, they're getting drunk in the boat the night before, and they're telling all these great stories about all the things they've survived. Oh yeah, well that's nothing. Well, this piranha ate this finger off, and check this out. And they're showing their scar. Oh, and then the guy pulls his leg up. Oh yeah, well this is nothing because I almost got swallowed by a whale, and on it goes. And they're telling all the things, the tales of what they've survived, and the scars are still on their body, and they're wearing it proudly. Yeah, well check this out. I had heart triple bypass surgery, and I'm still here to talk about it. And it just all this works together in my mind to say to me and to anybody who's listening, who tunes in, that not only do we connect most profoundly in our weaknesses, right, which connections is what makes anything work, but it's our scars that make us unique and valuable. That we all have our own scars, but that makes us precious because we all know that the more rare something is, the more valuable it is. And we all have our own story. And we're still in process. So even when there's holes missing, all the pieces haven't been found, haven't put in place, the light shines through those holes. And that's how people see where to go. That's how we share the love with each other. So that's one of my favorite illustrations.
I would agree. I think that, but there is a vulnerability. This is the shift, right? In showing that you have scars and showing and sharing your stories. This is the work that I've been working on myself and then also with others. But what is interesting is that people have said, Kristina, when corporate Kristina shows up, I show up as corporate X, Y, and Z. So you don't connect. You don't get to see the people. But when you show up as you, there is such beauty with all the good, the bad, it's not bad. Those stories were the breaks in the cup or whatever. Those are the most inspirational and amazing stories when we don't carry shame with them. When we can show up and be like, yeah, we've been through that. Hey, that's how I'm resilient. That's how I learned how to pivot. That's how I learned how to show up in the world and really drive results against all odds. Now, when you do that, it's really funny because that's what organizations are looking for, leaders who can do that. But you have to embrace who you are and embody all of it and be able to show up. And I think that there's such beauty in it. That is the shift, right? The older generation, which I was a part of it, even how I was brought up, it's like, you don't share stuff. Like you just bury it. Everything is fine. You just dismiss anything and you just kind of move ahead, right? Go back to the dam, right? We're pushing it back. We're there's holes. Oh no, we're going to just plug those holes in. Everything's good. Everything's good. But the fact is, I would think that we are learning that it is necessary to lean into who we are, lean into that vulnerability, and know that that's where real inspiration comes from, even to inspire yourself as
Right.
to who you are so you can
Yeah.
show up better.
Right.
It's, I love it because I understand that fully now. And before, what you said, the more senior you got, the more stoic you got, the more serious you would get.
Right.
Okay, that's foolery. That doesn't really, we don't laugh all that much.
Right.
I think that
Yes.
the more you can get people to be real with who they are, and as they evolve, you get charismatic leaders, inspirational leaders, but those are ones that have embodied and live their story. Like they really are comfortable in their own skin.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so let's go to the word vulnerable for a minute here. Brene Brown, if you've never heard
Yeah,
Brene Brown, I know you
absolutely.
have, but for those who have tuned in, if you've never heard Brene Brown, Brene Brown, she's got brilliant videos on YouTube and all over social media. And she studied this idea of vulnerability, ironically, or perhaps not ironically, because she, like we're talking about, kept everything inside, never showed any weakness, and felt disconnected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she starts into the studies, very academic studies about vulnerability, and has to actually do a shift in her own psyche, her own understanding
100%.
about what vulnerability really means. And I can just hear it in my father's voice, right? Vulnerable people use that against you. You show a weakness and they're just going to exploit it. I heard this my whole life, right? Which can happen for sure. So there has to be, I know there's a healthy way to be vulnerable without being taken advantage of. But there is always the risk that someone will take advantage of your vulnerability, right? And I think this is where there's a disconnect with the generation who said, never let them see you sweat, just shake it off and move on.
Mm-hmm.
And don't be vulnerable because someone will take advantage of that and use it against you. I was a victim of that, right? So I get that. And yet I do think there's this evolution that we're talking about into a generation who can no longer relate to an impervious leader who's always got their act together. Because it's like where's the humanity there? I can't relate to you if you always know the answers, if you've always got it together, if you always say the right thing and do the right thing. I think a good example of this is if you go to hear someone speak and they're flawless in their delivery and you go, oh, that was all right. And then you see somebody comes up and they trip over the stairs and they can't find their notes and their glasses are slipping down and they fumble over their words.
That's for
yeah,
sure.
but then they deliver something that's incredibly heartfelt, right? They're passionate and they're the conviction and they can't find the right words. But then your heart goes out to them because like, that's how I would be, right? I can relate to that. And then you're just all in. And so I just think we're helping, I think, crack open this myth that somehow being perfect is the good leader. Because one, perfect is a myth anyway, but it also keeps you separated, disconnected from those who you're trying to lead.
Yeah, and I would say too, like I feel pretty honored to be a part of this transition right now. Like as we're shifting, there is a shift happening, and to be, one of those leaders that can provide some awareness as to how you can move into this new way of being. It's doable. And it's much more fulfilling to be in this space, I will say from personal experience, than living a script of how you're supposed to be. So, I'm happy that, we're having these conversations because they're necessary. And there is an evolution that's happening right now. It's just whether or not you're brave enough to be able to go on the explore and put yourself out there. But one thing I will say, Mojo, what I'm seeing is that the more I am being brave enough to put myself out there, the more I seem to be connecting. So it's a gift, right? So I get other people, amazing people to come into my life because of it.
Well, that's a perfect lead in. So we only have a few minutes left here, but I want to answer the question that's probably on most people's minds. Why, right? I hear what you're saying. It makes sense, but why? Why would I go to that much trouble, that much work to shift out of what has worked for me? I actually been promoted. I've been seen. I get paid for it, right? Why? I think that's the question that I'm feeling right now.
Yeah.
Is this shift I think the shift is inevitable.
Yeah.
But for those who want to accelerate it and be on the cutting edge rather than just resign themselves to the fact like, okay, crap, I have to do this. Let's just dig in for a few minutes about why. What's the benefit of this for both the older generation and the younger generation?
Do you want me to jump in?
Yes, of course I do. I see it all over your face.
My heart is full. Okay.
Yes.
If you are looking for freedom in your life and fulfillment on a higher level completely, then this is the journey that you would need to go on. Because following the path, it's almost like a little bit like Groundhog Day. It's kind of like you're going up the ladder. I thought my life was great before, right? I had a very senior level job, making great money on the outside, but I was living someone else's life, right? Based on the external standards. Yes. But when you can tap into what you are really meant to do, there's no price tag on that. And it allows a different level of freedom and happiness in your life that may not even exist right now. You may not even know what that is as of yet. So why would you do it? Well, do you want a life full of like joy, fulfillment, connection, belonging? It's on this side that you're going to get it, in this heart space, emotional space. The other way is a life that's already been defined for you. And if you're good with that, so be it. But if you want to live this life that you have here fully fulfilled, that's why I would go into the other space.
Fulfillment, boy. So that's a strong word, fulfillment, right? And so again, I hearken to my dad a lot because he just embodies this generation of, you don't question what you're doing or why you're doing it. You just go do it because you're making, you just do it. You do it and you do it well and you're proud of yourself and you bring home a paycheck and you pay for the groceries for your family. And he's been doing that his entire life. He's 80 now. He's slowed down a lot, but he's still the hardest working guy I've ever met. Right.
Yeah.
But here's the point is, and your point is well taken about fulfillment, is that was very fulfilling to my dad, because here's his take. He says, Joe, I was probably 5 or 6 when my dad's out on a construction site. He's a welder, and it's road construction, and he's under this huge asphalt mixer thing. It weighs thousands of pounds, and one of the arms that holds up the place where they pour the gravel in was weak. So he's underneath it and he's welding. And I wasn't there. I've just heard the story secondhand. He's welding, and suddenly it gives out. The whole thing comes down on his back. He's alone. He's standing there alone.
Wow.
Several thousand pounds now, and he's bent over. He's still on his feet, but he's bent over, and the whole thing's on his back.
Oh.
And he's screaming out in pain. Help, help.
Yeah,
and it took a dozen guys to even lift it up enough where he could actually get out from underneath it. And he goes to the hospital and crushed several vertebrae in his back.
Oh, wow.
And the doctors told him he would never walk again. Right. Now, my dad's, like I said, one of the tough guys, grew up in the tough guy generation. And so he's like, I don't believe you, doc, and I'm going to prove you wrong. And sure enough, with his faith and with his willpower, not only did he get back walking, but he got back to working.
Wow, that's incredible.
And he says, Joe, I don't go to work for some sort of external reward or fulfillment. I go to work to take care of my family. And because I get to work, there was a time in my life I didn't think I'd ever get to work again.
Right.
So I take every day is a privilege. It's an honor. Yeah. He says, I don't understand the people who are trying to get out of work, because I'm like, I was afraid I would never work again. Right. And it's just like a wake up call for me. Like,
absolutely.
All the bells are going off inside my head.
Yeah.
And so what I don't want to overlay on anybody is what your why is, or what your fulfillment is, or what your purpose is. But Kristina made a very good point that if there's something inside of you, and I think this is in all of us somewhere, sometimes it's dormant, sometimes it's covered, sometimes it's buried, something inside of us that wants to feel like I matter, what I'm doing matters, that I'm fulfilled, I'm connected, it's purposeful, right? And my dad's purpose was different than mine, but he had a very strong purpose as to why he did what he did. And so then you overlay everyone's desire for purpose, meaning, fulfillment, and then the realization, that self-awareness, that what brings me purpose, meaning, and fulfillment isn't the same thing that brings the next generation purpose, meaning, and fulfillment.
100%.
But do I want that for them? Well, there's a win-win here, right? Because not only did they end up having a better life, which most bosses want their people to have better life, but it increases your bottom line, increases the connectivity, increases the culture, the joy in their workplace. You made this great point kind of on the side, like, well, we get older and we think we can't have fun anymore and we have to be serious about our jobs.
No,
and I'm on
have a blast.
Right. I'm on a campaign to say, let's bring play into the workplace because it's gone, right? Let's make it a work play, right? Like it's almost like the McDonald's Playland. It's right. But and that's a whole nother talk we'll talk about. But I really do believe that that we've taken childlikeness out of the workplace because we think it's childish. But that's a false notion. Childish is immature, it's whiny, it's babies, and we see lots of that in the workplace anyway, no matter your age. But childlikeness is full of awe and wonder and imagination. You said innovation, creativity, and all the things that make us feel alive and human, right? So here's the why. If we're going to summarize this, and again, I'm not defining the why for anybody, but imagine a place where whether you're the top boss or the entry-level worker, that when you show up, you know it's going to be connected, it's going to be fun, it's going to be meaningful, it's going to be purposeful, and I'll get paid something for it as well. But I'm not. The younger generation isn't there for the paycheck like the older generation, right? So they don't care about the office, they don't care about the accolades and all the externals. They want to do something that's meaningful. And so here's a chance to be a win-win for you, your employees, and your organization.
Agreed. And I would like to say, not because I know we're at end, but your inner child, when you see adults taking temper tantrums in the office, that's your child. That's your inner child that has not dealt with stuff like demanding. It's like a kid taking a temper tantrum. So it's funny. So why not bring them where they can have fun and play and be innovative and creative rather than having them having hissy fits and temper tantrums in boardrooms. So just something to think about.
Very good. Okay, we've crossed over our hour mark. Yes. I just want to thank you, Kristina, so much for your time, for your brilliance, for allowing this conversation to flow. I mean, we started with always do your best, and it went a whole bunch of different directions, but all of it really, really good, really important for us to keep in mind. So for people who would like to connect with you, once this broadcast is done, remind them where to find you and how to connect with you.
For sure. There's my website. I have all these socials. I am really working on developing this Facebook group, Successful Authentic Women. I know I'm pushing it, but it's really important. So there's that. And, I have my website, which I put up before as well. You'll find me. If you Google my name, you'll find me. And I'm definitely very reachable and would love conversations.
And please, one more time, the name of the book that you released.
Oh, The Authentic You, Unleash Your Leadership Potential. I think
The Authentic You.
Yeah. I think it's a great starting place for people when they're on the cusp of, I don't understand, and to potentially bridge. That's when I wrote it. So it's like the early stage. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it kind of opens the cracks to open that why. Why is this even important? I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So on behalf of me, Joseph MoJOE McCarthy, you can find all of my socials at the link tree listed underneath my face there, mojo.studio. And Kristina Holle, it's been a wonderful hour. Wonderful hour, full of inspiration and great stories. As always, thank you so much for your friendship, for your connection, and for the difference that you're making in the lives of those that you touch.
Oh, that's so kind. Likewise. So, okay, we'll talk to you later. Okay, bye everyone. Thank you.